careful, please. That elite was an ultra.
What is an ultra-Mormon? So an ultra-Mormon is a term that was coined in an essay from the 90s, I think. I read it years ago, and I haven't been able to find a copy since. Seems to be missing from the internet, at least from where I used to read it, or where I first read it. And in this essay, the author talks about the advent of the internet and how through the internet, members of the church became exposed to all sorts of historical information that previously had been very unavailable and hard to verify. I mean, since the advent of the internet, we've kind of had a revolution in apologetics, in openness, information. Like, without the internet, we probably wouldn't have the Joseph Smith Papers Project and the culture of trying to learn about the past. So anyway, in this essay, he talks about two types of Mormons, which at the time was the appropriate term. And he talks about the anti-Mormons and the ultra-Mormons. And the anti-Mormons, we know who they are. But the ultra-Mormons were a different type of person who were exposed to the same sorts of information as the anti-Mormons, except their convictions deepened and became stronger, seeing the same information. So yeah, he talks about those two types of Mormons. There's also the third Mormon, which is the social Mormon, and they are the type of Mormon who is simply just not that interested in the history. But the anti-Mormon and the ultra-Mormon are opposites. And the ultra-Mormons are frequently mistaken for anti-Mormons because of their interest in the same topics, but they have a totally different takeaway. And I just found this really profound, the way he explained it, and that's why I decided to name this channel where I talk about all these thought experiments after the Ultra-Mormon, because I just believe that there is a true perspective where everything will make sense. And that information that to some people is hard and, it's gonna break my shelf. I just learned about this and it broke my shelf. Like, that sort of information that people whine and cry about constantly on the internet. I think that that same information, for me, has deepened my testimony because truth is not about the facts. It really isn't. Truth is about your perspective. It is about the lens through which you view things. And this is why I love in the temple when it says that as Mormons, we believe in all truth, and that all truth can be circumscribed into one great whole. We're told to gather the truth throughout the world. Anything that is true is Mormonism. It is our faith. Our faith is the truth. And if it is true, then we ought to believe it. And if it is not true, we ought to not. So what is truth? It's not just facts. Facts don't care about your feelings. That's not the truth. You can talk about facts all day and feelings or whatever, and you can be lying through your teeth, which we see many of these online, priestcraft style grifters. That's what they talk about. They talk about the facts. And I think the facts are largely irrelevant. I think that what we need is the correct perspective. And this is why the symbolism that is both physical and spiritual and metaphorical all at the same time, which is the Nephite interpreters, which are these lenses that are triangle-shaped lenses inside of frames, right? That's the way Lucy Mack Smith described them, is that they had triangle-shaped lenses. And they are made from glass that was touched by the finger of God, and they're to be used by a seer. And through that, a seer can, in a sense, have the perspective of God and can know the truth. And by looking at the same information as everyone else, they can know the truth, and they can see the facts. Because whenever you argue with someone on the internet, everyone has a list of facts to support their opinion. There's always going to be facts, but we don't care. We care about the truth. We care about that correct perspective where every piece of the puzzle fits together. And that's what I'm looking for, and I don't claim to have found it, but I find the exercise of adopting challenging perspectives that I don't understand and trying to put myself in those shoes. That sounds very lame, cringe, but I mean it in like a true way. Like, if you can understand how someone in the 1800s thought about race, or if you can understand why someone in 1940s Germany felt the way they did, or why, there's a no end to the list of people. Like, why were some Americans loyalists? Why would they do that? Well, how can we understand them, and what can that teach us about ourselves And I think that as we learn to kind of have that, I guess empathetic is a good word, but the way to see from others' perspectives, I think it will increase our ability to recognize the truth. And the better we get at that ability to, once you can kind of learn that ability, I think it becomes much, much easier to start to see the truth everywhere. And that's what Alma was saying to Korihor when he said, I want a sign. And he said, there are signs everywhere. It's about learning, it's about trying all those different lenses. And there's a really cool book by Paul Feyerabend, which talks about science and philosophy of science, which is too long and too abstract to talk about. But there's a really cool part where he talks about Galileo. And in the time of Galileo, they had a good framework for explaining why the stars moved the way they did. And it was very complete and very coherent and internally consistent. And there were some problems with it, but they were working those out. And just like we have problems with our systems and models today. But one thing that they didn't want to do is they didn't want to look at the stars through any sort of a lens, because a lens could have impurities that would create a false image. It would create false facts, in a sense. If there was an impurity in the glass, you'd see a star that wasn't there. You'd see some sort of false image or some distortion. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that, in their perspective, that you can't just trust what you see. And so that's why they said, oh, we're only going to trust naked eye observations. Anyone who doesn't do naked eye observations is a pseudoscientist. They're not a real astronomer, totally fake and stupid. We have to do real science the real way, and that means no telescopes. And Galileo made a telescope, and he made a very good telescope that he was able to view the stars with, we'll say, minimal distortion. And when he looked at Jupiter, he saw 5 dots. That's 5 stars instead of 1. And he realized that Jupiter had moons. That is what kind of spawned his idea that maybe we are a moon. And he adopted a totally radically different perspective in interpreting how the stars move. And it wasn't scientifically supported. But he was willing to break those rules, and later Isaac Newton was able to build out the framework to explain how the Earth could possibly be spinning and we're not flying around all over the place. And anyway, sorry flat earthers, if there's anyone listening, but all the flat earth stuff that Christians throughout history were stupid and believed in flat earth is just fake. There's a really cool book called Inventing the Flat Earth, which is super interesting. So Western civilization has always known the earth is round, because depending on where you are on the earth, the stars are different, and the ancients watched the stars much more carefully than we ever will. So they knew that the earth was round, because that was the only thing that made sense based off the movement that they saw, which they were obsessed with studying. So yeah, that's what we can learn about the truth. The truth is lenses, and I think nothing encapsulates that more than the idea of the Nephite interpreters, the lenses that are touched by the finger of God. Joseph Smith, in the first vision, there's an account where it says that his eye was touched by God. When he acquired his seer stone, there's an account that says that he had acquired an attribute of godliness, an all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye is the truth, and that's why it represents God, because he is all-knowing. He has that correct divine perspective through which all of the facts will appear in the correct, undistorted configuration, and all other perspectives will have their own facts that they can see, but it is only through the correct divine perspective, which we must seek, that all things will come to be. And if we could see the Book of Mormon for 10 seconds, like what the civilization actually looked like, I have no doubt that instantly we would be able to put all the pieces together and prove that the Nephite civilization existed beyond the shadow of a doubt. But the way it works now is we're kind of digging around and using archaeological models that are built out by people who don't believe in the Book of Mormon, and I think you could look straight at the evidence for the Book of Mormon and not be able to see it if you don't have the correct framework. And there was an archaeologist who was like this crazy feminist lady who studied ancient Europe, and she had totally radical, crazy ideas, but because of those crazy radical ideas, she was able to discover all sorts of stuff about the worship of like different mother goddesses and stuff that other people had totally looked over, because she had this unique perspective, and her whole framework was wrong, but she was able to make valuable contributions. And so that's why I think that when we investigate the gospel, we need to have kind of back to Paul Feyerabend, he talks about epistemological anarchism, and basically he just means that there should be no rules as to what is a valid inquiry and what is not. And I think when we study the scriptures, I think that we should be very open-minded and kind of keep everything on the table, and that is how, with the Spirit and with an open mind, I think that we'll be able to see things that we hadn't seen before. And that's really the point of what I'm trying to get at here. It's a topic that I really enjoy, like the philosophy of science stuff, learning about Karl Popper, or I read Thomas Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, recently, and that sort of stuff it's really, it's kind of above my reading level, but it is very interesting to me, so I have to force myself to wade through those kind of more scholarly nonfiction books and get that perspective, because it's really interesting. So yeah, that's what the truth is. The truth is God's perspective. It's the all-seeing eye. And there are many impersonators who want to look like God or be God or claim that they know all the facts, that care about your feelings or whatever. So anyway, don't be led astray by anyone, including me. You got to find the true perspective and just search for it, and got to be willing to be wrong. I think that if you're not willing to be wrong, then you'll never be corrected. So I think you got to be brave to go out there and tell your elders quorum, hey, I think that the way we interpret the scripture is not right. What if it meant this instead? Like, let's just pretend, like, what could we learn if this was the correct interpretation? What would that say about God? How can we learn more? And I think that less dogmatic approach, that's what Joseph Smith was trying to foster. I think that the dogma, I think that having very rigid perspectives, it kind of pigeonholes us. And with the incrementalist approach to knowledge that made famous by Karl Popper, like the logical positivism or whatever it's called, we're never going to get to the truth. We'll just get to a truth. And a truth would be like a local maxima on a graph. Like if you're a blind person and you're trying to find the highest peak, if you crawl around, you can maybe find it at the top of a hill, but you'll never find Mount Everest, right? For Mount Everest, you need a guide. You need the Spirit, you need a prophet, and you need an open mind, because otherwise you're just not going to find it. So that's your lesson for today. Seek the truth in all things, follow the prophet, stay faithful. Anyway, hang in there.